My name is Matthew Wells. I'm the research director here at the Elling Eide Center. You may have noticed that you sat on some surveys when you came in. And if you could kindly just fill those out for us afterwards and leave them on your chair, that would be great. I was told to let you know. On behalf of the staff, I want to welcome everyone to the Elling Eide Research Library and Preserve. Our public lectures highlight areas that were scholarly and personal interest to Mr. Elling Eide. Those areas include the languages, literatures, and cultures of East Asia, as well as the diverse cultures of Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent, the horticulture, ecology, and natural environment of Little Sarasota Bay and Florida more generally, and the cultures and languages of the indigenous people of the American Southeast. Today, we are very happy to welcome Professor Robert Campany to the Eide Center. Dr. Campany is Gertrude Conaway Vanderbilt Chair in the Humanities and Professor of Asian Studies at Vanderbilt University. For several decades now, Professor Campany's scholarship has guided colleagues and students through genres of literature that were either neglected or seen as mere precursors to or raw material for later so-called great works of Chinese fiction and drama. Instead, Professor Campany has demonstrated over the years the ways in which these miracle tales, anecdotes of the supernatural, accounts of transcendence and immortality, and now records of dreams can be used as tools for deepening our understanding of medieval Chinese literature, culture, and religion. His prodigious scholarship includes nearly 50 articles, 6 books, with a 7th on the way next year, that include both critical translation and studies and 2 edited volumes. I should mention that his efforts on behalf of the field also include taking the time to write lengthy and very helpful replies to an inquisitive graduate student who emailed him out of the blue more than 20 years ago. And I know that I'm not alone in benefiting from his critical feedback, encouragement, camaraderie, and friendship over the years. Dr. Campany's lecture today, entitled Dreaming of Pre-Modern China, is based on his recent research for 2 monographs on dreams. The first, The Chinese Dream State, 300 BCE to 800 CE, and the second, Dreaming and Self-Cultivation in China. His lecture will provide an accessible overview of how Chinese people in ancient and modern times thought about and responded to dreams, touching on a wide range of texts from anecdotes, histories, and treatises to Taoist and Buddhist scriptures. The talk will show that there were many ways to understand, interpret, decipher, and make use of dreams in early China. Would you please join me in giving Dr. Campany a very warm welcome?
Thank you. That was very touching. I'm sorry. Appreciate it. Well, good morning to everyone here in the room, and so glad to see so many of you. And also, good morning or afternoon or evening to those of you joining online from whichever continent you're joining us from. My topic, as Matt mentioned, is dreaming in pre-modern China. What I intend to do in the next 45 minutes or so is, can you all hear me okay in the back? Okay. It's just to give a very, some highlights of course, a much richer and more varied set of ideas and texts that I'll have time to get into this morning. I think of this as a quick tour of the dreamscape. And by this word dreamscape, it turns out that I actually went and researched this word because I used it a lot in my 2020 book, which Matt mentioned. And dreamscape has been used in all kinds of interesting ways. It's even the name of a German heavy metal band or something. But what I mean by it is not, it may seem like it means what you see in a dream. But what I mean by it is the total set of ways in which people in pre-modern China, I'm using pre-modern today as a shorthand really for about 300 BCE to 800 CE, if you care about that. But so the total range of ways in which people thought about dreaming. What did people imagine was happening when we dream? What sorts of things did people make of dreams? Or how, what did they use dreams for? So that's that whole big set of things is what I mean for the purposes of this talk by the word dreamscape. So let's see. I'm going to start out with an innocuous seeming, just a snatch of conversation that was recorded in a early 5th century text, 5th century of the Common Era. It was the gentleman whose name appears first was a quite well-known, very famous person in the state, very highly placed official. He had a conversation with a young man named Wei Jie, who later would become his son-in-law. And the youth was asking him about dreams. So right off the bat, you know, dreams are mysterious, right? We all know this. You know, what's happening? What is this? What's going on? What does it mean? Should I be worried about something that I dreamed? Should I take it seriously? He wants to understand what causes dreams or what they are. And Yue Guang gives a very interesting reply. He says, well, they're thoughts. Xiang, maybe here imaginings, something like that. And you're probably thinking, as I am, okay, that seems reasonable. Hard to argue with that. I mean, because for us, right, for most of us, I think we think of dreaming as whatever else it is. It's something that's going on in your brain while you're asleep. So it's some kind of thinking. It's just that you're not awake, but your mind is still active, right? Nothing terribly controversial seeming there. But the young man is surprised by this response because for him, he's used to thinking of dreaming as what happens when you're asleep and one of your multiple souls escapes your body and goes out into the world and has adventures, has experiences. And so he's like, what do you mean they're thoughts? I thought that, you know, what he means by saying when body and spirits or spirits aren't in contact is, you know, your body's still in bed, but your one of your souls has gotten out, and we have multiple souls in this system way of thinking about human beings. So how can we be thinking if what dreaming is our soul out of our body having some contact with something? And Yue Guang comes back with, well, they're the result of causes. And then he elaborates on what he means by causes in this very interesting and odd way. No one's ever dreamed of entering a rat hole riding in a carriage, or of eating an iron pestle after pulverizing it, because in both cases, there have never been any such thoughts or causes. So, you know, he doesn't elaborate on this, but what seems to be the case is he's sort of saying, to paraphrase what I think is an implicit theory here, dreaming is, we're just, when we're asleep, our mind is rehashing thoughts that we've already had when we're awake. And here it's like, you know, you wouldn't dream of something that's impossible in waking life because like it just wouldn't even make sense. Like, I mean, of course, I would say, well, I probably know people who have dreamed of things exactly like this. And I can think of some David Lynch, you know, film scenes where but you see what I mean. You know, so like basically, so this is an implied view of dreaming that I think is approximate to a very widespread, if not the only modern Western view of dreaming, or just really modern neuroscientific view of dreaming, which is that absent sensory stimulation or input from the outside world, dreaming is what happens when our mind is active, but we're not getting sensory input. And so your mind is spinning on imagery that you have pulled from your waking experience. And you also kind of make, I think in my dreams at least, I've learned it's very risky to generalize about dreaming. I can't assume that the stuff I dream about is the stuff you dream about. But anyway, that you know, you usually make a story out of it. So you're taking the kinds of images that you encounter in daily life. Your mind is putting those together to form some kind of narrative about something, and that's a dream. And then okay, so that's this passage goes on, but I chopped off the ending because that's enough to make my point. So here's the funny thing about this little reported conversation. You may be thinking, okay, so what's the point? Well, the point is this conversation about dreams is extremely unusual for pre-modern children. There's almost nothing else like it in the literature, at least up to 800. I've looked at all kinds of texts. I've looked at narratives, poems, incantations, Taoist scriptures, Buddhist scriptures, Confucian texts, even historical writings, tales of strange events and so forth. And that kind of view of dreaming just isn't there. That was a minority report. Yuan was very, I think, a very thoughtful man, but very unusual in his view of dreaming, which is probably one reason why that little report got included in the text that it got included in. So then if that was an unusual view, what were the more common views? Well, we've already seen one, which was that the soul, one of your multiple souls, leaves the body during sleep and has an experience or encounter, and that's your dream. That was actually only one of many views in pre-modern dream of what is China, of what is happening when we dream. Let's see what we've got next. Let's see here. All right, so I'm going to move from stuff that may seem relatively familiar or recognizable to stuff that at the end that's really out there. Okay, so hang on to your seat. This one's pretty close to home. I'll show you what I mean. And I've tried to chop out here all the unnecessary details, most of the proper names, and most of the Chinese characters, just to try to strip these stories down to their bare frames. So a guy dreamed of someone who gave him 7 mulberries, and he placed these in his lapel. And when he woke up, he really had the mulberries in his possession. Okay, so that's not even the end of the story. So then the story continues. He's a diviner. So he goes, he's like, okay, this has to mean something. How do I find out what it means? If you're like me, I sometimes arrive at my own idea of what a dream of mine meant. I've never consulted a dream diviner. But in pre-modern China, it was very common to go consult an expert because dream interpretation was a very technical art. It was a skill that people trained in. And there were both people running around who were experts in it, and there were also texts that had been made by experts that where you could look up certain dream symbols and see what the meaning was. So the diviner, what does he do? He works on wordplay. This is very common. The fruits were mulberry. There's the character and the sound. That's not, I think the pre-modern pronunciation was roughly what this modern pronunciation is in Mandarin, sang. This means your family will soon have 7 burials. Another word, sang, which is written with a different character as you see. So it's like the dream is a pun. Now, this is a view of what's happening in dreaming that I think Sigmund Freud would have recognized and been very comfortable with. He talks extensively in his great book, The Interpretation of Dreams, about dreams as working sometimes with puns, wordplay, rhyming words, and so on. So there's an example. And then, of course, typically these stories capped off with the prediction came true. So the diviner knew what he was talking about. He wasn't just making something. All right. So there's one example. So a kind of a view of dreaming as, the dream isn't what it seems on its surface. It's a symbol of something else. This is what I call the indirect mode. There's 2 great modes for thinking about dreaming, and then the modes subdivide into other things. And don't worry, I'm not going to subject you to all of those. But in the indirect mode, what we have is the idea, as we've seen, that dreams are giving you a message, but the message is in code. The dream isn't what it seems on its surface to be about. It's about something else. Well, how do you then figure out what the else is? You have to decode it. How do you do that? Well, it's a technical skill, as we've seen. So you either talk to an expert. You had to pay them, by the way. They didn't work for you. Or you looked it up in a manual that you had acquired, and but of course now you might have looked in your manual and you might not have found mulberry in there. So now I guess you'd just be strapped. But Those were the choices, all right? And so in this mode, once you get the decoded meaning of the dream, it's usually one of two things. It's a prediction of some future event or events, or it's a diagnosis of your current condition or status. Now, condition or status includes a lot of things here. I'm not going to give all too many examples today, but just for example, there's several, if you read the Chinese medical classics, so-called traditional Chinese medicine goes back a long way. And in the early texts about that, it's quite common to find certain dream topics or words marked as indicating an illness within or some sort of imbalance or disorder. And so a physician would, I suppose, have asked patients in some cases about their dreams as a diagnostic tool. Also diagnosing your, like, we might say, soteriological status. That is, I'm on a quest to become a religious achiever of some sort. The dream is going to give me a diagnosis of where I stand on the path toward that goal. Am I doing well? Am I doing badly? Is there something blocking my progress that I need to know about? And the dream might give an indication about that sort of thing. More examples now of this indirect mode. The examples are the fun part. This one's really wild. So a guy keeps dreaming of someone who just appears in his dream and says, Zheng Shu Zhou, Zheng Shu Zhou. That's all he says. Guy's like, what do you want? Who are you? And, can't you talk? That's it. So he thinks about it and he realizes, this is a code. Here's what it means. West of my house, he knows this, right? He can see it. There's a mound out there. It's got some broken tiles in it. It's maybe a ruined ancient tomb. Maybe there's a dead body, someone's remains in that mound. The guy's name, here it is, decodes as, I'm the person among the broken tiles west of your house. I see what, I'll show you on the next slide in more detail what I mean, but you see, like, if you I guess this light won't shine on that screen. That's okay. But if you break apart each of these three characters, you get those 7 characters. It's the idea. And so again, not content with, the story's not going to stop there and leave you hanging. Well, it turned out to be true. And so the dreamer, this is common in these kinds of stories where, so I have to explain this a little bit. We have a deceased person whose remains are in disorder. This was a grave problem, both for the deceased person and potentially for other living people. And so the deceased person appears to a living person and asks for help. So the dreamer says, well, this probably was thinking, this guy lives right next to my home. I better take care of him or he's going to come and haunt me or something. So he reburies him and the guy comes back and thanks him. So he got it right. He figured it out. He took care of the dead person and not only reburied him, but reburied him generously. Here's just the character, how he decoded each of the words. Another example. So a guy was dismissed from office and he dreamed, this reminds me of that famous Godfather scene. A severed bull's head lay outside his gate, oozing blood. At least it wasn't in his bed, right? But still, he considered it very baleful. I think that makes, probably most of us would have done so. But it's not baleful, as you see. He summoned a dream diviner. Once again, I better call in an expert. This is serious. I need a diagnosis here. The diviner said, to see blood means that things will become clearer soon. The bull's horns plus its snout form the correlate. This is Xiang, if you're scoring at home, so like graphic image of the character Gong, which means, one meaning of it is like high official, duke. Your rank will reach the level of duke. This is actually a very auspicious sign. So as we all know, dreams aren't always what they seem to be. Ones that might seem inauspicious might be auspicious and vice versa. Does that remind you of a bull's horns and snout? You can sort of see it if you squint, you know, like that. Anyway, and sure enough, he was appointed to a post. So he's just been fired, and now he gets to be hired, and he's going to rise all the way to do pretty good. Pretty good. What else we got? I got a million of these. Ellen. I think one more example of these, and then I'll move on. I'm not going to just do these. So a guy was riding a horse, dreamed of riding a horse up a mountain. When he was coming back, he rode around his home 3 times on the horse. All he could see was pine and cedar trees, and he couldn't find the gate. It's like he's riding around outside his house. He can't find the way in. Once again, I better ask a diviner. This may be bad. Diviner said, the horse belongs to the I Ching or Book of Changes trigram B, which corresponds to fire. And fire is disaster. So the diviner is working in a different mode than what we've seen so far. But this way of interpreting dreams was also, and probably still is, very common. You relate something in the dream to one of the 64 hexagrams in the so-called Book of Changes, okay, or trigram here, not a hexagram, but just a 3 lines, not 6. And each hexagram, each trigram has a name. I see some people nodding, it's like some of you are familiar with this. So the I Ching, this makes sense because the Book of Changes was a divination manual. It wasn't written to interpret dreams, but it was very often used that way. So because it correlates with Li, and because Li correlates with fire, and because fire is usually very dangerous, this is a bad omen. But it gets worse. A person ascending a mountain forms the character Shil. So you can see this part of this word is like the Chinese word for mountain. And this part looks like the Chinese word for person on a mountain. But Shil as a character means inauspicious. I mean, so that's kind of coded into the dream. The diviner unpacks it. It gets even worse. That you only saw pines and cedars means a tomb gate. That's because tombs were usually planted with these types of trees. Not regular tombs were like mounds, and then you would plant trees on or around the mound, or around the gate, like you would have a walking gateway with trees up to the grave. Not recognizing where the gate was indicates there was no exit. Circling 3 times means 3 years. You're gonna, something really bad's gonna happen to you in 3 years. And sure enough, as you can probably guess, X was in 3 years executed for plotting. All right. So that's the indirect mode. Now, the interesting thing for us about the indirect mode is, again, the ways of interpreting the dream, images the images might seem unfamiliar, but the idea that the dream is a code that you can extract some sort of meaning from by some method is relatively familiar, I think, to many of us. Even if we don't typically engage in that ourselves, we've all read some Freud or some Jung, and we're used to thinking of dreaming as a kind of as a message, but not a direct message. It's a coded message. I think. Yeah, so here's some examples. I mean, I just pulled these statements out. Freud, dreams are about you. Whatever else they are, what's happening in your dream is some part of you talking to you about you. Whatever else is going on. And for Freud, also dreams were typically backward looking, not forward looking. He says somewhere explicitly. Dreams have nothing to do with the future. They're about the past or the very recent past, or else they're about the present. Carl Jung has a way of, talking about how you should interpret a dream, like with a client or with a patient. And what you're supposed to do is talk with the dreamer and see what associations the dreamer has around certain components of a dream. Excuse me, and that's where you find the dream's meaning. One more example, Fritz Perls. And Mom, if you're watching, this is for you. My mother did a doctorate in human development, and she read this guy, Fritz Perls, on dreaming. She once told me this, and it really stuck in my mind. And so I used it in the book that was published a couple of years ago. Perls says, every single last thing you see in a dream is part of you. And so like if you dream of just an ordinary scene of like a sugar bowl on a table, that sugar bowl is part of you and it's trying to tell you something. It has a message for you. You have to get in there and open the sugar bowl and see what's inside. You know, it's going to talk back to you if you know how to make it do something. So this is, we're used to seeing dreams as symbolic messages from ourselves to ourselves about ourselves. But as we're about to see, this was an unusual, well, let me put it a different way. In China, symbolic, yes, but if there's too much of you going on in China, the dream is worthless as a predictor, or worthless really so in other words, if, like, for example, if you think about something during the day, this is Wang Tong writing in the 2nd century or first century of the Common Era. And if you think about something during the day, you dream about it at night, for purposes of like predicting your future, this dream is completely worthless because all it is repackaging of daily thoughts, and it is not to be relied on as a presage of anything else. Only when your dreamer, your energies have been touched by something else, really informed by spirits, will divination be possible. So dreaming in pre-modern China sometimes was seen as, a message from yourself to yourself, but in such cases, its symbolism was worthless. It was like garbage, basically, for purposes of trying to do anything interesting with it. Whereas for a lot of, modern Western dream theory, that's the whole thing that's going on in the dream. Yeah, long term. Let's see. Now, finally, before I move on to some even wilder stuff, diagnostic uses of dreams, incubation. So incubation, some of you I'm sure are familiar with this term. It's a term of art for people who study the history of dreaming. In many cultures, ancient Greece, ancient Rome were great examples. There were ways you would go and sleep in the temple, for example, of the god Asclepius, and hope to get information from the god in a dream that would heal your malady. So here, there aren't as many examples of this in the Chinese archive as I could wish to have found, but I did find several. And here's a Taoist example from the 6th century. So this is for new initiates who are having trouble hearing from the gods directly. You're supposed to be experiencing appearances by spirits in your dreams or in waking life. And if you're not, you have some problem you have to deal with. So you first have to go correct your faults. That might take a while. And then once you've done that, then if you want, so in other words, dreaming is used here as a green light. So right now the light is red. And only when you get a green light from the spirits can you proceed on this course further of initiation. So you quiet your mind, you fast, you maintain ritual purity. This is probably fasting for several days. You ingest talismans. These are basically divine commands. I don't have time to get into them too much today. But what they do is they summon gods. And then you lie down quietly seeking a dream. Okay. Then this presumes that you do have some dream. Of course, you might not, or you might not remember it. But if you have a dream, you're supposed to figure out whether it's auspicious or there's that character again, shown inauspicious. And I presume you would have done that with your teacher or your master. And so if you get a dream and it's an auspicious dream, then you can proceed. But if you're not sure, you've got to wait. If you don't wait and you try to rush in the door, very bad things can happen to you and probably to your family. Okay, this is just an image to pause. Let us collect our thoughts. Now, direct mode. Now, this is the stuff that's really going to freak you out. Here, there's nothing symbolic about these dreams. This is an encounter. Something is happening to you in real time, and you're really being bumped into by something outside your head. And it can be good, bad, or neutral, but it is nevertheless a meeting. It's an event. It's not like a commentary on the world. It is part of the world. It's like stubbing your toe or bumping into someone, on a subway or something. It really happened. The encounter is real. Something in the world changes as a result of it, including you, the dreamer, often. The dream often will make possible some kind of relationship between the dreamer and whoever the other being or party is that's bumping into you in the night. So dreaming here is a portal of real interaction. Okay, now, we've already seen one example of this. You may have noticed I didn't comment when the guy dreamed of 7 mulberries, and when he woke up, he actually had them. I mean, that's never happened to me. I don't know about you, but and I don't mean the mulberry part. Now, this is an example of what 19th century spiritualists in Europe and North America used to call an apport. You dream of getting some object, and when you wake up, you have the object in your hand or under your pillow. Ooh, that would really freak me out. So that's this sort of thing's all over the place in the record. So let's see some more examples. I'm going to take you to some strange places here. So there was a guy who had a recurring illness. He was really worried about his health. He took refuge in the Buddha. And you notice he got his mind straight, utmost mind. So he's like fully devoted his concentration to devoting himself to the Buddha. Nothing else was on his mind. That night he dreamed a man of extraordinary appearance. My guess is this is what I call a spirit monk, but I'm not sure. Doesn't really matter. Somebody came and handed him a little packet and a razor and said, take the medicine, use the razor, your illness will be cured. You can probably guess the next line, right? He woke up with a start and he actually had the medicine and the razor. He had once took the medicine and his sickness was dispelled. What's the razor for?
Killing yourself.
No. Buddhist monks shave their heads, right? So he's being told, and nuns too, by the way. So he's being told, become a monk. So he does. He leaves the household, joins the Sangha. That's a way of saying became a Buddhist monk, and he lived past 80. So it worked. And we have an apport, a 2-part apport, a packet of medicine and a razor. Let's see. Sometimes you have to click this a lot to get it to move here. Another example, this is one of my favorite stories. Guy was on a ferry. People travel a lot in pre-modern China by boat. He sees a twig on the river or the lake with an ant running up and down on the twig. The ant's clearly worried. So he interprets, he's looking at the ant's behavior and he interprets it. This ant feels scared. He has this empathy with this very non-human creature. He brings it on the boat. I guess it doesn't say, we assume this. When he got to the other shore, he put the stick down on the ground and let the ant go. That night, he dreamed of a very imposing black-robed man who thanked him and said, I am king of ants. Should you ever be in trouble, let me know. So the man has done the ant a favor. In Chinese culture, this value of ba, reciprocity, is very important, negative and positive. I do you a favor, you owe me one. One of roughly equal weight, that's just like a lot of cultures work that way. I think there's nothing distinctively Chinese about this. So, a relationship has been started. Years go by. And then, sure enough, this man found himself falsely arrested. Now, this is not good in any culture, but in pre-modern China, if you were falsely arrested, this was very, very bad. Ways I will not elaborate. I don't want to spoil your lunch, but so he remembers his dream and he gathers several ants into his hand and he tells them of his trouble. And then he dreams again of the black-robed man who advised him to hide out in the hills and wait for the pardon that somehow the ant king knows is on its way. This is before, electronic communication. So, the pardon's taking days to come from the court to wherever this is, but the ant knows about it. So the ant, first of all, he appears as a human being in the man's dream. This is the sort of thing that dreaming makes possible. Okay. And, as an ant, the ant is strapped. You can't talk to the guy. He's not wearing a robe. He's just running around on a twig. But in the dream, he appears in human form and he has human speech. And he also, off stage, he seems to understand the workings of human society, even including the imperial government. So somehow he has access to this information. And so when the man wakes up, he sees that ants have chewed through his probably bamboo or wooden restraints. He's able to escape. He hides out in the hills until the pardon arrives. And indeed, there we go, the pardon becomes, right? A relationship through dreams, direct encounter. Another example. Now, this one, I realize that's a lot of words on the screen. This is just to remind me to tell you about this one text very quickly. A young man around the ages 17 to 19, had an amazing series of direct waking divine visits, as well as visits from gods and goddesses in his dreams. And he kept a diary of all of them. And that diary is known as Records of Master Zhou's Communications with the Unseen Realm. And, in his dreams, he reports things like this. And this is just one of 40 examples of patches. So basically what he's doing is he's being given a tour of the divine world in his dreams. And if you're wondering how this story ends, it's this young man felt he dreamed or had a waking vision of being commanded by this set of gods to hurry up and die so that he could take an office that they had waiting for him in the divine administration. And so he made an elixir and took the whole thing and died in his mother's arms within minutes. But in his mind, he was going to the celestial court to become an official in the divine realm. So that was another set of possibilities that dreaming in the direct mode opened up for people. Now, this is an interesting passage. This Kongqiu is Confucius, and another well-known ancient thinker by the name of Mozi or Moadi. So this passage, it's like they spent the day deeply, heavily engaged in self-cultivational practice of some sort. And they were working, they were reciting passages probably about the ancient kings of Zhou, for example. And at night, they would see the ancient kings of Zhou in their dreams, and they could ask them questions. So it's like the idea here is if you cultivate yourself intensely enough while you're awake, then in your dreams, your self-cultivation work will be allowed to continue. So dreaming just becomes an extension of your waking life efforts to better yourself morally, just in terms of your knowledge, your intellect, your perfection of the human way, or whatever it was. With wills as concentrated as this, what could they not accomplish? And then, so yeah, this is like a text quoting what I guess was a common saying. if you immerse yourself enough in study, the spirits will come and talk to you. The implication is while you're asleep. But for this text, this doesn't quite fly. So this text adds, but it's not really a matter of spirits informing you. It's just your own focus and immersion. So this text is uncomfortable with the idea that the spirits are real and that they really visit you in dreams. But plenty of people were quite comfortable, it seems, with that idea. Some of you may know, the Analects, a collection of sayings and descriptions attributed to Confucius. And Analect 7:5 has him lamenting how long it's been since he dreamed of the Duke of Zhou. He says, I must be slacking off. Now, we don't know, typical for Confucius, he was very, very sneaky about, like, does this mean he really believed that the spirit of the Duke of Zhou was coming to him at night if he was, if he was working hard enough during the day? Or was he talking about his own focus and immersion? From the Analects passage, we can't tell. But for these guys, this is reassured Twinfield. It wasn't spirits, it was his mind. But this is what I call the spillover paradigm. You're doing something so intently during the day, working on your self-cultivation, that at night your dreams become an added platform for self-cultivation. You just keep doing it, even though you're asleep. Then there's something, so those of you who know some Chinese know that this is how we say nightmare in modern Chinese. I have a chapter in this forthcoming book that argues vociferously, I think, that this doesn't mean nightmare in pre-modern times. It has to do with pollution, ritual pollution, uncleanness, like the word we see a lot, for example, in the Hebrew Bible. If you're ritually unclean, you can't do a ritual properly. You must first go and purify yourself, and then you can do the ritual. So it's sort of like that in this case. So you can get impure by what you dream about. Now, why would a dream make you ritually impure unless it were the case that in the dream you have actually been contacted by something outside yourself that has left you in a state of impurity? So that's the idea at work in this kind of way of approaching dreams. So this is like a really serious case. You dreamed of something foul, like probably, you dreamed of committing a sin or done something really impure and grossly inappropriate. Well, how do you fix that? 14 days and nights you don't eat. That's just for starters. And then, without leaving your place of practice, this is Bodhimanda, your Sao your temple or your monastery, each night you have to bathe in scented water, put on new clothes, intone an incantation before a Buddha icon, as many times as you can until you drift off to sleep. 14 nights of that. On the morning of the 15th day, you get up, you heat some water with fragrant herbs, you then strain out the plant material, you make a paste, a powder of incense, you mix that, dissolve that in the water, and then bathe with that water. After placing it before the Buddha icon, you enchant a spell with it 108 times. 108 is a special number. I don't have time to explain why. And then you use that water to bathe, and then you're ready to go. And then you can eat, and you can continue your work of self-cultivation. So dreaming, you've really been bumped into by something really nasty, and you have to go through this elaborate process to make yourself okay. We're almost done. Don't worry. Don't worry, Matt. Okay. So this like dreaming as visitation kind of mode can be taken even to the extreme of dreaming that you are another being. Now, I don't know about you. I've never dreamed that I remember that in my dream I was something or someone else. But I have friends who have. I once went back when I used to do Facebook. I no longer do Facebook, but I was just sort of informal, very unscientific poll. Any of my friends out there ever dreamed, and in a dream you were someone or something else? And they're like, yeah, I did. But I never have it. Anyway, So here's a guy who really likes pickled minced fish. I guess this is sort of like sashimi that's been, soaked in some vinegar or something. So he sent a servant to bring him fish from a nearby lake. Then he fell asleep. And he had a dream of being a fish in that same lake. And it was very happy. He was enjoying himself. You'll see in a moment why I have this line in color. Then, though, dream turns bad. He experienced being netted by some fishermen, taken to the market, sold to the very servant he had sent to the market to buy fish for him. The servant lifted him by the gills, strung him through the throat, arrived home with him. This guy, while in the dream, could recognize members of his own family when the servant came in with the fish. Someone put him on a chopping block and cut him in two. It was, as painful as if he were being skinned alive. Only when his head fell off did he suddenly wake up with the start. And then he woke up then, right? So he was like dazed for a long time. This really left a mark on him. When family members asked, what's going on? He recounted the dream. He then, brought the servant in, like, tell me about when you went to the market to buy this fish. And what the servant recounted was exactly what he had dreamed. So the waking man's narrative and his own dream experience matched up perfectly. So this was a real event. He was a fish for a while, but not completely, because he was able to recognize his family as a fish, but he was also a fish in the dream. Let's see, I think this one has a nice little tagline too. Yeah, he joined the Sangha. I better become a monk. This is bad. Okay, I got one more passage for you and then we'll. This is one of the most famous passages in all of Chinese literature. Is a parable, really, I think, about a dream. So this is Zhuangzi, of course, the famous chapter 7, the butterfly dream. Here's the story, how it goes. Once Zhuangzi, that's Zhuangzi, the purported author of this text, dreamed he was a butterfly, flitting and floating around, happy with himself and doing as he pleased. So that reminds me of that line in the fish dream. As a fish first, before he got caught by fishermen, he was having a good time. It was fun to be a fish for a while, not knowing he was Job. Suddenly he woke up and there he was, unmistakably Job. But he didn't know now if he was Job. Whoops, I figured that out too soon. Uh-oh, gotta do it all over again, sorry. Didn't know if he was Job, who had just dreamt he was a butterfly. I don't know why that's fading on me. Or a butterfly dreaming he was Job. Now, between the two, there is necessarily a distinction. So they're not the same being. It's one or the other, but he's temporarily not completely sure which one it is at any given moment. This is what's known as the transformation of things. So I'll leave you with my reading, one of my two readings of this little parable. This parable, as you might imagine, has been interpreted in a lot of different ways by some very smart people. Here's one of my interpretations. So it's not that Zhuangzi literally doesn't know whether he's a butterfly or a human being, but that he's relaxed about feeling as though he's one or the other at different times. While dreaming he's a butterfly, he's happy, not knowing he's Job. This loosening of his sense of himself spills pleasantly back into his waking life, where he can entertain the instructive and fun thought that maybe it's the other way around. But it's still as Zhuangzi that he's entertaining this thought, right? Just as the protagonist in the fish story still recognizes his family, even while he's dreaming that he's a fish. There must be a distinction between Zhuangzi and the butterfly, between waking and dreaming, but which side of the distinction you're on at any given point is of no consequence whatsoever. It changes from moment to moment, and each state has its joys. This is what's known as the transformation of things, and the recommended attitude toward it is acceptance, here exemplified in Zhuangzi's reaction to his dream. So, with its privileging of wandering and staying on the move, its valuation of only temporarily lodging in any one point of view. This text, the Zhuangzi, portrays dreaming not as a danger to be responded to or a coded message, or even a spilling over of waking pursuits into dreams, but just a way of roaming outside conventional boundaries. And it's dreaming's otherness with respect to waking life that makes this possible. What dreamers bring back with them isn't any specific new information, but just a refreshing loosening of their grip of the little certainties that structure our daily lives. A reminder that at any point we are liable to awaken and realize that the fixed points we had taken for granted all along were, after all, nothing more substantial than dreams. Dreams don't need to be assimilated here. They're less a series of lumps demanding to be smoothed out as they are exit ramps or ladders out of the matrices of culture and society and tradition and convention. This text is medicinal in nature. It's designed to awaken in us an awareness of bigger, more expansive possibilities. Like what this text argues concerning dreaming itself, the Zhuangzi text is fundamentally therapeutic in character. But this too, I think, this approach to dreams that I've sketched also is a way of assimilating dream, a way of seeing it as doing something, necessary function for us, a way of making dreaming serve a human agenda, even if the agenda is reminding us that no scheme of order, no single way of mapping what we naively take to be reality can be considered final. And this talks mapping of some of the meanings and uses of dreams in pre-modern China must similarly be regarded as terribly provisional. Thank you all for coming this morning.
I know that some of you have to go, and so if you need to go, please feel free to quietly leave. However, for those of you who would like to stay and ask some questions of Dr. Campany, please raise your hand. I'm sure he'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
First of all, thank you so much. Just a few comments. I'm a medical doctor, and I was always very interested with Asclepius and all the dream temples, and but the word therapeutic is what, maybe wrong, but what I remember learning was that the temple goddesses, one of their jobs was to help the dreamer remember the dream, so put it on the throne of memory, and that function of the memory, then the goddess then would help the incorporation and assimilation of the wisdom that the dream brought. So I always thought that was interesting. And yes, I did ask about dreams and what the mission. Another thing is interesting is 108. 108 is also a very sacred number, as everyone probably knows in India. 108 mantras before you eat. I just wondered if you knew anything about the 108.
I know too much about it to get into today, but let me say a few things. So first of all, the reason that number appears in that story is that's a Buddhist text. The Chinese got that number, the idea that that's a special number from Buddhist text, which of course came in from India to China. 108 is I'm really bad at math, as people who know me know, but it's a so-called Harshad number where the sum of the integers adds up to the number or something. I can't explain it any better than that. So it's, it's got some mathematically interesting quality, which I cannot explain well. And then it's used in all kinds of Buddhist settings. I think it just sort of conveys totality. Like Buddhists often use a rosary type of, string with beads on it. There's typically 108 beads. There's like 108 verses of some famous scriptures. The Buddhist body contains 108 something or other. There's like 50 examples where this number comes into play in Buddhist texts. I can't remember them all right now. I actually have an appendix on this new manuscript because I had to go and research it. I thought, okay, I know that 108 means something, but I don't really know what it means. So I need to go find out because the reason I needed to know was there's another book, sort of an interpretation manual that I didn't talk about today, but it's a Buddhist manual for people on the Bodhisattva path. And there are 108 primary dream signs listed in this manual. And then each one has like sub-signs. But why 108 signs? Well, I think it's because the text wanted to argue implicitly, this covers all the ground. So basically, if you have a dream of something and you can't find it in this manual under the signs or the sub-signs, if you add up the sub-signs or something, there's well over 600 different dream possibilities in this text. But if yours isn't in there, then don't worry about it. It probably doesn't mean. But so it was meant to be a comprehensive guide to dream.
Interesting, you said Buddhism is a classic phrase in Buddhism. All this is a dream. On your last method, the therapeutic element of loosening your fixed identification does sound very Buddhist. Of all this is a dream.
Well, yeah, and one of the interesting things I think is true about religions, especially really old ones like Buddhism, they ended up with all these different positions on stuff. So, a lot of us are familiar with the idea that, Buddhist texts say often, oh, don't worry, everything in this world is just a dream. But many other Buddhist texts, I showed you one or two examples, take dreaming as a real event. So maybe that is just a dream too, and everything else is. You see what I mean? In other words, a great old widespread tradition like Buddhism can end up, by the time we get down into modern times, with about 8 or 9 very different stances on what's going on in the dream. They don't just they're not committed to one idea. No tradition this old is going to paint itself in a corner with regard to something as common as dream. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
Is there any distinction between daytime napping and nighttime sleeping in terms of dreams or how they were looked at or?
Good question. I've often wondered the same. Sometimes in this genre of stories that you saw several examples of, like Tales of Strange Events, which I've studied a lot, it will be mentioned that someone has a dream, but the story will take care to mention that they had it during the daytime nap. But I've never found, are you aware? I've never found of any discussion where this is seen as making a difference in what the dream means, if anything, or what significance it may have. But the fact that it gets mentioned is curious. I feel like I think there's a rock there that I haven't managed to overturn yet.
The only thing I can think of is that story that I remember teaching the story, but I have not studied it, is that World in a Pillow, where the guy but I don't know, the nap is contrasted with the amount of time that he spends in the pillow in his other life. And then he wakes up and only a couple moments have passed. But I don't know if the nap itself is significant versus taking like a night's sleep. Seems only to be the contrast between the duration that he thought he was living and how much time he actually spent during it.
Yeah, I think you're right there. It's in contrast to the 8 hours or so, if you're lucky, of sleep that he might have had that night. The nap is just very brief. He just dozes off for a moment.
Right.
But he has this like whole other lifetime during the dream, and he wakes up and whoa, what happened? Yeah.
I have a question. And since the interpretation of dreams and the notion of the existence of the spiritual world are connected to Buddhism, since communism has taken over in China, how prevalent are the ideas about dreaming and what it is to be human in terms of when you're not completely awake? And in other words, do people still have any of these ideas about dreaming in China?
Oh, now?
Yeah.
You know, to be just bluntly honest, I wish I knew. I think that in China today, people, just like in our society, have all kinds of ideas about dreaming. I know that some Western modes of psychology have been imported into China and used, deployed there. The big difference in China, as many of you probably know, between like urban populations and people in rural communities. So if you like polled people about what they think is going on in dreaming, you probably find that that would be where you
I
would
guess
see.
what I'm asking specifically is, how many people in China do you think still believe that there is a separate spiritual world? You know, right out of Buddhism, where, you know, the soul goes into anything, and then, you know, you have to put bugs outside because it could be a human soul or whatever. How much of that has been changed?
I think quite a lot, but again, it varies by, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're in Beijing, you're talking to a professional person, they may have the same kind of dismissive attitude about dreams that you or I don't know what views you have, but or about spirits. But if you go talk to a farmer 100 miles west of there, say, probably there's a very active dream culture. This bears a lot of similarity to some of what we touched on here. So it's a big society with all kinds of.
I guess I was just interested in how successfully they had obliterated the notion of a spiritual world.
They have failed. If you mean they, if you mean that,
The
to mean the government,
Yeah,
they have failed.
okay,
Yes.
that's an answer.
Yes, sir.
I've taken most about the story of the dreams, the tiles, and the person underground, and I'm thinking about how it changed. Because when my cousin died, he texted.
Texting,
Yes.
really?
One of the days later, they received a text from his father died.
Was he buried with his cell phone? I'm gonna make a mental note of that. I was planning to be cremated. Is that really? See, I just love that. I think that. My personal take is that we don't have the faintest idea about reality. We think we know everything. We really know so little. That's really interesting. What did the text say?
It says, I love you, and it was a farewell, I love you type text, but you've been dead 3 days. It was unbelievable.
I would love to know the exact wording of that, but anyway, that's great. That's the most interesting thing I've heard all.
There's a question online here about the role of rituals to facilitate dreaming, such as those in Wenchang temples. And if you have anything to say about
Right.
that.
Yeah, so I had that one slide about an incubation process for, I believe it was, Taoist case. There are, and really the, never mind. So that's incubation. What I found is that incubation is not nearly, it's not easy to find in the texts. Now, of course, I haven't read every passage in every pre-modern Chinese text. I don't imagine anyone could and still live to tell about it. But of the ones I have read, which is not a small number, this gets mentioned rather seldom. But there are other cases of it. I have a section on this in my forthcoming book, so I would invite this questioner to get my book next summer. It's coming out in June, I think, of 2023. And you can find what I know about that topic up to 800. It's not as much as we might wish for, but it's more than nothing.
Great.
Yeah, it does play a role.
Great. Other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a discussion about the role of repetitive dreams.
The role of
Repetitive dreams, when somebody keeps having an individual come to them, or it's the scene over and over a period of time. So they have a,
Oh, yeah, we saw some examples like the one that Chung Shudong, remember he dreamed of this man insistently appearing to him over a number of nights, just saying the words, now, of course, one funny thing about that passage, this is not answering the question, but just a side, what I say to my students and call it a sidebar. You have to imagine giving you a bit of peripheral information that really has no importance whatsoever. It's interesting. So as you may know, in Chinese you have sounds, but you also have these characters, and there's a lot of homophones. So one thing I wonder about that story is how did the guy figure out what the characters were? In other words, there's if you take the name Zheng Shudong and you're like, what characters might those be? There's probably 100 or 200 possible answers to that question. So how did he settle on the correct one? Yeah. I almost think that story, still on the sidebar, that story was like back written. Someone started out with these 3 characters, and which could form it's plausible that they could be a name, someone's name. And they said, I'm going to make a story where this is like the answer to the puzzle, And I say this because when people spend, I'm always telling my students this, you have to imagine a pre-modern culture, no electricity. When night falls, it gets really dark. You have a lot of long trips on boats and in carriages. People needed stuff to talk about. They didn't have TV. They didn't have cell phones, even in their tombs. And so what would they do? Well, they would tell a lot of really interesting stories. And I think that a lot of these stories emerged out of those contexts of people just really passing the time. For our equivalent might be, sitting in a doctor's office waiting room, striking up a conversation with a stranger and sharing a couple of weird stories. And I've even, our colleague, Laura Manley, who's leading a workshop here starting tomorrow morning, found a really cool passage where it mentions travelers together on a boat. They must be like going down a river, so it takes a while. And it's a drinking game, and they're going around on the boat, and you have to share a strange story, something weird. And if it's deemed not strange enough by the other people, you have to take a drink. But I think so in this case, to finally, answer, it's not really answering your question, it's throwing some spaghetti at that wall, maybe it'll stick. The dream got repeated because the guy hadn't got the point yet. The dream figure was giving him enough time to figure it out, so he just kept appearing until he figured it out. What was I? Something else I was about to say about that. Of course, yeah, his need for. Oh, yeah, I know. The other weird thing about this story is so after the dream is figured out, the living man, fixes up the tomb and reburies the dead man's remains, and then the dead man appears to thank him. So it seems that before the reburial, the dead man couldn't speak. All he could do was get his name down. But then once he was reburied and his body was taken care of, it's like his tongue was loosened and he could come and speak normally to thank them. I mean, that's just implied, and no, I don't know of any kind of worked out theory that would explain that, but that's a weird thing about that particular anecdote. It's like getting his remains taken care of enables him to communicate more effectively in his dreams or through someone else's dreams. The question? Yeah.
I'm curious to know that as a scholar in this field, how does it change you?
Great question. Thank you. I actually write about this in the 2020 book. It's called The Chinese Dreamscape. It's on Amazon. Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that as I've already said, I tend to be someone who thinks that all of these certainties we think we have about ourselves, about the cosmos. I mean, it's not, I don't think, of course, modern medicine, for example, I'm not saying I think that's a waste of time or anything of the sort, but I just think that there's still an awful lot of mysteries that we haven't yet fathomed. There's maybe whole dimensions of stuff that we haven't even yet become aware exist. How can we figure them out if we don't know they exist, you know? And working on this topic and especially when I did the poll I mentioned, the informal poll, like, because I went around thinking, okay, so I have to back up and tell you, I'm summarizing a little section of the 2020 book, the Chinese Dreamscape. I was writing this manuscript and I kept saying, you know, this may surprise us because this Chinese thing, you know, seems unfamiliar to us. And then I thought, who's us? Who's the we that I'm imagining would be as surprised by what I'm finding in these texts as I personally am? And I thought, maybe I have no business assuming that my readers are going to be surprised by what I'm surprised by. And so that's why I did the poll. It's like, because I thought, okay, here's a dream like the drawing's a dream. Here's a dream where a guy is shown dreaming that he's something else, some other, not just another person, but another species of being. Has anyone ever had a dream like that? I was confident that the answer would be no. Are you kidding? And several of my people I know personally, maybe not that well, said, yeah, I've had a dream like that. I was just like, you gotta be kidding. And then I said, like another one of my little informal poll questions, I said, has anyone ever dreamed of being like spoken to in human speech by an animal? And several people like, yep, happened to me. And then like, actually after, at some point during the writing of that book, I had a dream where there was just one weird little scene where there was a cat and the cat spoke to me in English. It was almost like, so see, what I would say about that is my mind was saying, see, that can happen, don't be so, but who knows, maybe it was a spirit cat, you know, I don't know. So it just, I guess the impact on me was that it impressed upon me from a new angle, something that I've already felt was the case, which is the world is full of mysteries. And what I think I know about dreaming may not necessarily be true at all. And I need to keep an open mind. And as I think Zhuangzi would recommend, just sort of be open and see what pops up out there. You never know. So,
I want to thank you for saying that because we've been married for 47 years and it's been a running joke. That close friends of mine will say things about dreams and say, or whatever, perceptions, and will say, well, you know, they always preface it with, well, you know how when, and then they will describe a dream, some idea or whatever, and I'll look at them and I'll say, no. And I'll be stunned at how crazy it sounds, and I thought I knew them. So I commend you on understanding that us is a dangerous thought.
yeah. There's like scientific, you know, social scientific studies where people have gone into societies like modern Iran or like, I don't know, modern France, and they polled people, you know, has this ever happened to you in a dream, or your views on dreaming? And those views are all over the place. I just had no idea that even in a kind of modern industrial society, people's view of dreams, I think if you compare them to views of several hundred years back around the world, aren't that different. Maybe we've got new ones now, like Freud, you know, that have sort of joined the conversation, but the old ones are still alive too. You know, like one question, do you think that you've ever been visited by a spirit in a dream? Or is it possible, do you believe, to be actually visited, actually contacted by a dead person through a dream? A lot of people answer, yes, I do. And then if you know, like followed up, you would probably get a story from them about the time it happened to them or someone they know. So it's,
How much of that do you think is couched by religion and I guess religious iconography? I don't mean visual, but I mean cultural iconography.
I certainly, yeah, religious ideas and texts and practices have some impact on these things, but I think also some, you know, the other side of the coin, some religious ideas about things like this are formed out of people's experiences.
Oh, okay.
So there's a conversation, I think, always.